Weekends are better when you spend it with us. Weekends with Jason Olbourne on today's News Talk, TNT.
Welcome back to Weekends. In 1997, I had my first ever world trip as a young 20-something and took myself all around the world, went to the United States, which was the one place that I had in the centre of my mind and heart. That was where I wanted to go. I tacked on a trip to Europe, went to London with little expectation of what I might see in my week's holiday there. And I remember, never forget, how much I fell in love with that great city and thought, my goodness, I want to come back and I want to bring my family when I'm older, etc., etc. And it was the place that just blew my mind. It had absolutely everything. Fast forward some quarter of a century, and the London that I visited, well, my friends over there tell me it's nothing like that anymore. And it just seems at odds with so much for this great country, the centre of the empire, if you will, the constant of Queen Elizabeth for my entire life, for all of our lives, the longest-serving monarch that anyone could ever even imagine. And this was this great constant in the world, even if England didn't have the power that it once did. It was still what it was. We look now today, as we're now approaching an election in the UK next month with Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, calling an early one, and it appears that the UK government will collapse in a landslide. But how will that play out and why? Is it just a case of anything but Sunak? Can Nigel Farage create some sort of a stir? Or is this just this same old left-right paradigm that we watch as we just get into a downward spiral? So how do we discuss, how do we analyse, and how do we work out what's really happening? Well, Dr. Gavin Ashenden was the chaplain to Queen Elizabeth II from 2008 until 2017. He graduated from the University of Bristol with a degree in law and subsequently did postgraduate study in psychology of religion at Haythrop College in the University of London, followed by a doctorate on the life and work of Charles Williams. Tell you what, there is no one better to get onto the show at this historic moment in UK history. Dr. Gavin Ashenden, welcome to Weekends.
Jason, good morning. Thank you for having me.
Well, good morning to you, sir, and thank you for your time. It is early Saturday morning. I really appreciate it.
It is a bit early, yes.
Look, I can't thank you enough, because at this time, and this is the best part of international broadcasting, is that the inconvenience of timing, but at the same time, the amount of wonderful people that we get to meet and talk to is the price, therefore, of the inconvenient clock. But as we get started in our conversation today, is the UK recognisable from the one that you grew up in?
Well, it is in some ways. It's physically exactly the same place. What's happened is they, and then the big question is who they is. We're still trying to work it out. They have changed it by wholesale immigration, but also by propaganda. There's a real generational divide, so that if you want to have a conversation about what we're going to talk about now, for example, with anyone over 50, you can probably have it. But if you try and have it with most people under 50, you can't have it. You can't even have the conversation because of the way in which education has, well, effectively brainwashed. It's a very clumsy word to use, but the level of political, sociological, philosophical propaganda that's come through the system. It's partly to do with what cultural Marxism has called the long march through the institutions. They've reached everywhere, and they've filled people's heads with information and patterns of ideas that dislocate them from reality. I think that's the real difficulty. You say, look, even to the extent that politicians are afraid to tell you who a woman is, there's hardly any greater dislocation of basic reality than that.
It's very, very true, isn't it? And it's an interesting distinction that you make there in the over 50s and the under 50s, and obviously the indoctrination of an education system and the role of Marxism. Despite all of this, we were all warned in Western society about it, and yet just like a pendulum swinging. It's gone back in the other direction, and this march goes on. How did we miss it? Was it as simple as just a switching of ideas from left to right? How did it go this way so swiftly and so convincingly to split society the way that it has, do you think?
Well, Jason, you asked very good questions. My only fear about it being early is not that it's inconvenient, but I'm not entirely awake, and so you're asking questions that require one to be woke in the best sense, as in alert and conscious, and that's a really difficult question. And I think part of the answer, because I don't know the answer, but part of the answer is the boiling frog process. I got in there early because. And forgive me if this sounds a bit overdramatic and self-referential, but I'd spent the early part of the 1980s smuggling Bibles into the Soviet Union and Czechoslovakia, and so I had some direct experience of totalitarian Marxism, particularly because I got caught by the KGB, arrested, interrogated, and the people I was visiting their lives were profoundly oppressed. And also, like Jordan Peterson, I had read my Solzhenitsyn, and so I was deeply set against the whole Marxist experiment. It wasn't that I wasn't in favor of justice for the poor and restraint of capitalism and redistributing the resources of society in a fairer way. You know, who could not be in favor of that? What I was really worked up about was taking liberty away from human beings, liberty to think and liberty to speak, so that if you were a Christian in the Soviet Union and you maintained your Christian worldview, preferring God, the idea of God to the idea of the state, well, they would put you in psychiatric hospital. They would say you're mad. And you can see that today, if you continue to believe in biological reality, once again, this ideological totalitarianism, which has somehow morphed from the Soviet Union past the wall of Berlin that came down in 1989 into our society. How has it morphed? That's just a big question. But it has morphed. So that if you, again, don't accept the ideological totalitarianism that's come upon us, you're either mad or bad. I think the best reason for the process by which it happened is the cultural Marxist one, because there really was a group of people called the Frankfurt School who decided that Marx's economics weren't good enough, and if they wanted this totalitarian revolution, they needed to have a plan B. And plan B was to present dialectical materialism in a cultural rather than economic context. And so the culture wars started, and they started quite early. All the political correctness goes back quite a long way. But what's extraordinary is the way in which people swallowed it. And I spent 25 years teaching at Britain's probably most radical left-wing university. And round about 2000, well, two things happened. First of all, I became alert to what Islam was intending to do at the turn of the millennium, because I had Muslim friends. I was involved in fairly high-level conversations between Islamic, Christian, and Jewish representatives. And they told me that their intention was an Islamic Europe through immigration. And I couldn't believe it. And when they told me the statistics that already by about 2004, they had 50% of people under 16 in 7 or 8 major towns who would eventually vote for Sharia law, I realized that democracy and demography would present part of the country into their hands. And so by the year 2000, it was clear that Britain was going to become a new Lebanon, just because of the numbers. And when you said this to people, they just laughed. And I said, but look, here are the numbers, and here are what my friends tell me, and here is what Islam is and what Islam says, and here is what Islam has done. What hole in the jigsaw are you missing? Because but still, they couldn't get their heads around it. And then about 10 years later, I realized that what we then called the political correct agenda was going to stop you saying some things. And along with Peterson, who's been so helpful to many of us, by showing us that if you can't say things, you can't think things, mainly because most of us, we all have limitations in the way we think. I've got a few degrees, but I'm not particularly intelligent. I have trouble thinking things out, and in order to think them out, I have to talk them. And then I talk with them to people like you, and you say, "Hey, Gavin, you haven't taken this into account, or you're exaggerating that." And I go, "Oh, yeah, I have," because the thinking process is not just rational; we're also emotional beings. There are things we want to be true, and so it's a complicated process coming to the truth of things, and we need each other and we need to talk. If, however, you're in a system that they stop you talking and you're afraid to use certain words. I saw an Irish politician yesterday in a free speech syndrome say, I own my words. You don't own them. You can't tell me which words I can and can't use. And this was such a powerful thing to say. It struck me again. This is at the heart of it, but go back to the narrative, which I'll stop in a moment. By about 2010, I could see that cultural marks, I could see that the political correctness was going to stop us talking about things. And so I went looking for the solution. I don't know how many people knew about the Frankfurt School in 2010, but I didn't. And so, then I read about it and I thought, whoa, this stuff is crazy. But if the long march through the institutions is really going to work, and above all, it's chosen to use our preoccupation with sex and with gender to get at us, then we're in real trouble. And I then discovered I was in so much trouble because I began by being very pro-LGBTQ plus for all kinds of kind of normal reasons. But then when I discovered some of the implications of what was going to happen, babies being sold, bought and sold in order to make gay couples feel more accepted without any concern for the human rights of a child, who at the very least ought to have the right to access to their biological parents rather than be constructed as a kind of social add-on. I then resigned from my university post because I didn't want to get sacked, because as I was out talking about these things and asking about them, I could feel the kind of the dead hand of censorship moving. So I left. And then during the next 10 years, of course, the whole woke thing blew up. You're very nice about England. We admire Australia and New Zealand. We think that you guys have got a very nice corner of the world where you have the opportunity to make things over afresh, unburdened to some extent by our history and constitutional patterns. But when I look at what happened during COVID in Australia and New Zealand, you're no different from us. You got brainwashed too.
It's quite extraordinary, really. I had on the show last Saturday Dr. David Klatzow from London, who's a forensic scientist, and he talked about academic fraud and peer review capture. And in that conversation, he was describing London and the post-COVID era, and he made the observation of the amount of restaurants that have closed down in the UK in that period. Well, it's a virtual mirror image reflection of what's happened here. We've lost restaurants of all categories, lower end cafes, small restaurants, right up to Michelin star hatted restaurants closing down after 30 or 40 years of success and very long waiting times to get in, just choosing not to do so. So this is something that obviously has spread around the world. It was shared at the exact same time. And it's very, very disappointing that we're seeing the collapses, if you will, of modern society, et cetera, et cetera. Just to circle back to the comments that you made about Islam and relating it back to cultural Marxism, my question, therefore, is, and it can only really be a balance, but was this an Islamic master plan linked to a trick with the West? Or was it just an accident of a whole bunch of useful idiots consumed by the cultural Marxism, so it would be created this perfect storm? I'm trying to work out if the whole thing is a master plan or just an accident.
You do ask very difficult questions first thing on a Thursday morning.
They're opinion-based, so you're allowed to be wrong, Gavin.
Well, I don't mind. I don't mind being wrong, because then you get closer to discovering how to be more right. The difficulty with your question is that it all depends upon your philosophical presuppositions. We're going to have to talk about religion at some point, but I don't really like to. Although I'm a passionate Christian and I've become a born again Catholic, I don't like talking about religion, because once again people have been programmed to misunderstand it. And so I prefer to say that we all have philosophies of life. So the answer to your question is, what's your philosophy of life? Was it an accident or not? In one sense, nothing Oh, I'm going to get. He wants this. Nothing's an accident. Everything's an accident. Let's go back to what we know. It's not an accident in the sense that this is Islam's master plan. This is what Islam is set up to do. It began with a prophetic Arabian warlord. He or some other people after him wrote a textbook for a mixture of religious and philosophical and political domination, and it works extremely well. I mean, it's really successful. And when you look at how there's a guy called Robert Spencer who does a wonderful map on Islamic expansion and battles. And essentially, there are three ways of Islam spreading, mainly by the edge of the sword, but also by immigration and breeding's an unpleasant word, having big families. And so Islam is set to do that. The question is, do you allow Islam to do it? Now, the only reason you don't allow Islam to do it is because you have a better philosophy. And so Christians have had a better philosophy, and they've resisted Islam at some really quite significant points. Islam came up through Spain in the 6th century, and the Battle of Tours, it was defeated. It came through the East in the 17th century, and it was defeated at Vienna. But it's always been pressing on Europe. So this is an old master plan of Islam, but you have to have a better idea to resist it. The big change has come in the end of the 20th century when we got stripped of our ideas. And instead we were turned into consumerists who wanted only pleasure. And as many Muslims have said, we prefer death more than you prefer life. So we're going to win because we're prepared to blow you up and to sacrifice our lives. And you're prepared to sacrifice nothing because you just want an easy time. So whatever gives you an easy time is what you'll do. And so the combination of the absence of a philosophy of life, this dreadful, corrosive, hedonistic consumerism where people just want sex, food, and comfort, and pseudo peace of mind, means that we're completely vulnerable to people who've got stronger ideas. Now, there are two ideas that are stronger. Well, there are three ideas that are stronger than no ideas. There's Islam, there's Marxism, and there's Christianity. And effectively, and we'll probably talk about this when we come to talk about the English election, you've basically got Mohammed, Jesus, and Marx and their followers in a three-way fight. But what's happened already is that Mohammed and Marx have teamed up in a kind of game of tag. Now, it's because Marx thinks that he can use Mohammed to overcome Jesus, But Marx has done a very good job at overcoming Jesus because Christians have given way to the consumerist comfort. They've become sub-Christian. They've lost much of their passion and their ideas. I mean, Jesus warned this was always going to be the danger for his followers. You had to choose between cozy comfort and being willing to sacrifice yourself for love, for forgiveness, for meaning. And all those things require a self-sacrifice. But if you're not going to sacrifice yourself, you don't get them. So Jesus warned there was always going to be this difficulty. And the thing about Christianity is it's a personal thing and do with personal integrity. But both Mohammedanism and Marxism are collective things. You just belong by belonging to the group. So the pressure on you for integrity is considerably less than it is in Christianity. Christians have to make daily choices about the extent to which they're going to sacrifice themselves for their ideals. Muslims and Marxists don't. They sign up to something and they get carried along by consenting to an enormous ideological and cultural tide. So back to the scenario. Marx and Muhammad are in cahoots. Marx has done Christianity in because the Christians have been faithless and cowardly. But he thinks that he can deal with Marx, with the Mohammedans in the same way. He makes the mistake of thinking that Islam is a kind of Arabic sub-branch of Christianity, but it really isn't. It's something entirely different. Christianity has a difficult relationship with politics because essentially it's getting people through this world to another one. And we're supposed to travel lightly here, not set up camp. Islam sets up camp, a fortress camp. And so Christians always have a very ambivalent relationship with the political process. Muslims have a very sophisticated, let's plant our camp here and make the process work for us, and it does. So at the moment in this country, the Christians are given way. The Marxists are in control. We're going to have a Marxist government for somewhere between 5, 7, 10 years. And then there's a guy called Hillebex, who's a brilliant Belgian novelist who wrote a book called Submission, warning us what would happen in France. And essentially, the big difference is going to come when Islam moves into mainstream politics with Islamic parties and then joins with the left in order to defeat the right. So in France, it's about how do we keep Le Pen out? We'll do anything to keep Le Pen and the Front National out. How will we do that? Well, there's 10 million Muslims there whose vote we can have. Anyone who's got 10 million votes in the bag in a democracy is doing extremely well. Hitler managed to take over Germany. I know you should never really introduce Hitler into any conversation, but let's just do it for the moment because the way in which the Nazis subverted democracy in the 1930s was to have about 12% of the population signed up to the Nazi party, and with 12%, you can carry the way. If you have a guaranteed 12% of the votes, to say nothing of the other. Nothing of the other 88%, then you can do it. And so the point at which Islam can guarantee 12% of the democratic is a point where they win democratically, and they're not very far off that in France. So with the emergence of a democratic party, a political party, things will shift enormously, and we saw the beginnings of that here, when a number of Muslims stood as Green candidates and in local elections in the last 3 months. This is very fresh.
Gavin, sorry to interrupt you. We've just gone over time on the break, and it will. So
sorry.
It will. So what we'll do is, I want you to hold that thought, ask a difficult question, get a brilliant answer. And I didn't want to stop for the break, but we're going to have to. We're going to come straight back and get into it. In the meantime, before we take that break, don't miss out on a thing. Be sure to download the TNT Radio app from either the Apple App Store or Google Play, so you can easily watch or listen to us anytime, anywhere. It's available right now to download, keeping you up to speed on today's News Talk TNT.
TNT's State of the Nation.
Brian, seeing his arms move the way that they've moved, it's not just his legs, it's his arms. He not only has dementia, he's got some serious neurological issues going on with the regulation of his extremities. I don't know whether his proprioception is working. That's where your knowledge, your awareness of where your limbs are in space. He's not moving like a well man. And on a human level, as much as we oppose him politically, this is really upsetting.
Yeah, one of our previous conversations we had with Dr. Kelly Victory, she went over a lot of that symptomology, and it's it's harsh because it's a familiar thing. I think many of us know someone or have a family member who's dealt with this sort of thing as they get older, and I can't even imagine putting this guy on a plane and flying him to a foreign country.
State of the Nation on today's News Talk TNT. Unbiased information.
Honest and forthright.
News without the misinformation.
It doesn't matter what side you're from. What matters is what you say, the truthfulness behind it.
Today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
Welcome back to Weekends. My guest this hour, Dr. Gavin Ashenden, and a stunning explanation of the world in 3 triangular process: Islam, Marxism, and Christianity. Gavin, it's extraordinary. Ask a difficult question, get a brilliant answer. I'm going to allow you to finish, which we're unfortunately disrupted by the break there.
You're very kind. Really clever people can answer difficult things quickly, but when so this is taking a bit longer, I'm sorry. But the end is in sight. So we've had Islam break into the political process just in the last couple of months in the local elections, and it was a shock, because what you discovered was that as Islamic candidates celebrated their victory, belonging to the Green Party, the Independent Party, whoever took them on, they exclaimed with great excitement, Allahu Akbar, which is exactly the cry with which the terrorists have blown up our children in our arenas and on the streets, and said this one is for Palestine. Now, again, the problem with Palestine, the problem with Ukraine, the problem with all these areas is very few people have got the information that they need. So, if you ask kids on the street from the river to the sea, which river, which sea, they have no idea. They don't know what they're talking about. If you say, you do realize you're calling for the genocide of a whole nation, they don't seem to care. So the problem, the reason for saying that is, as Islam enters politics with a few of its determined goals, one of which is the destruction of all Jews everywhere at all times, and the other is to make the world as Muslim as possible, politically and religiously. We are going to find that we've launched that campaign into our political process. And then again, as I said at the beginning, you have to have a bigger and better idea that you care about to stop it. And one of the things that's happening now in this next general election is, exactly Marx with the left, Islam, which is of course far right, but allies with the left, and then the death of the ruling power who sold us into bigger ideas. And although, in a sense that, we could now talk about conservative politics and philosophy, but essentially the people masquerading as conservatives have really been liberal Democrats in our country. I mean, in our terms, that's sort of centre left, really, and there has been no right at all, because the right has been eviscerated from the public platforms by the media, with the exception of you and GB News and a few others. So the problem is, we entered this election with the propaganda only from the left, with an alliance of Islam and the left, with a complete collapse of the ideology of conservatism, which I won't say is right, because no one really knows what the right is, but we might want to talk about that. And Farage coming in saying, "I'm the only voice you've got. What are you going to do about my presence here?" And that's the really interesting question that we're about to face.
It's an extraordinary scenario, and it may well be that it could be too early, this left-right paradigm. But the arrival of Farage is in many ways, it feels a little bit Trump-esque, perhaps Trump-light, whichever way, and this is all to be played out. I just want to just review before we continue. When you explained the collective ideology of Islam and Marxism, do you find it ironic that advocates, therefore, who are going after the individuals, which Christianity based on individualism, therefore depend on collective punishment to utter a term such as "from the river to the sea"? It just seems to be at odds with the idea, but at the same time, collective punishment can never be acceptable at any level.
I think there are some very basic ideas at stake here, which is why I started off by saying the way we answer this question depends upon your philosophy of life. One of the real choices to be made is between the individual and the collective. I think, as Tom Holland has pointed out, there's nothing natural about the state of life that we enjoy at the moment. There's nothing natural about human freedom. There's nothing natural about the sanctity of the individual. There's nothing natural about human speech, freedom of speech. We've taken them for granted, and Christianity has produced them. I have arguments with my secular friends about who's really responsible for the scientific revolution, the freedom of slaves, and the growth of democracy. But they can only happen. They have only happened in a Christian worldview. And that's not to say that Christians get everything right or Christians are better people. Far from it. I'm just talking about the ideas for the moment. The Christian idea is the best idea going and produces the best results, whether you believe it or not, or like it or not. It's just very effective at producing things that allow human beings to flourish. So back to your question about collectivism. It's nice to have your cake and eat it. It's nice to have the privileges of a society built upon individual freedoms while giving up responsibility and allowing yourself to be part of a herd. COVID showed us that. I mean, I could never have believed in 2019 that we were about to enter a period of state totalitarian collectivism based upon a complete mirage of medicine. I wouldn't have thought it possible. And yet people I knew and liked screamed at me to wear a mask, to get vaccinated. And when I said, but where's the science? And they said, well, people have told us the science. No, but where's the science? And there wasn't any, now, and they're not even embarrassed now that there was no science. I mean, they're not even having the conversation. There's no humility. There's no shame. There's no, oh my goodness, why did we let that happen to us? We're back to the question, who did it? I don't know. I'm very interested. But in a sense, that flight into collectivism was an example, I think, of the trouble we're in, because if you want your individual freedoms, your individual rights, your individual responsibility, and I want them passionately, you have to not take flight into the collective. But the collective is very attractive. Collective punishment, as you say, we all like to hate large groups because, it's part of the whole psychology of projection that human beings are involved in. And it saves us from having to take the trouble to work things out. But the moment you take that trouble, you discover you're dealing with individual human beings, and it's problematic to work out levels of moral responsibility. These things take a lot of effort, a lot of integrity, a lot of energy, some intelligence. And on the whole, too many people just want the comfort of the collective. So I think what you described in terms of either the paradox or the contradiction between individualism and the collective is just people being invited to the standards, the high standards of the sanctity of the individual, but giving way to the laziness and the self-indulgence of the collective because they can't be bothered.
People love to own after they buy was a statement that was presented to me in a sales course I did probably 20 years ago, when it was involving, the selling of big ticket items, because it was involving a process and a script, etc. And it was the idea that once somebody made a certain decision, they would back themselves to it. And I'm wondering, as you described, therefore, where the lack of science was, and today the lack of inquisition, because have gone down this pathway. Therefore, we now see a situation in society that people are happier to believe and still believe in a lie rather than confront the reality of the truth. Have we got a chance, therefore, from this point, or is this just a propaganda machine that's going to go until our inevitable demise?
Rod Dreher, who's a brilliant American journalist and writer, has written a book called Live Not by Lies, which he got from a phrase of Solzhenitsyn, because the whole collective endeavor always depends on a lie. And one of the lies in Islam, for example, is that they don't mean the Quran. But when radical, what they call Islamists, but they're just conventional Muslims, stand up and say, okay, now let's implement the Quran, with stoning for adultery and execution for gays, and amputation for thieves, people are surprised and said, "Oh, we didn't know you meant it. We thought, you really mean this. We presumed you didn't." They rather prefer the lie of the presentation of cosmetic assurance. The same is true with communism. Communism has never worked. It's simply the communists begin by stopping freedom of speech, imprisoning their opponents, and then killing them. And that's what they did in Russia. That's what they did in China. There isn't a single communist state that's successful. There never has been. And yet everyone under 50 in the West has somehow bought in to a form of soft communism without any history and any understanding. And they believe the lie. And the lie is, we're going to make a just and pleasant society for everybody. But it's a lie. And it has never happened. And so this you touched a nerve for me, because it's and then we believe lies about ourselves sometimes in terms of self-promotion. It's not just lies about political or religious or philosophical parties. There's also a great danger of believing the lie ourselves. So yes, I'm afraid it's difficult being a human being. It's really, really difficult, because the things we most want and like and love require a degree of self-sacrifice, and most of us, all of us, caught between comfort and sacrifice. But it's a bit like food. if you comfort yourself with food, you'll get fat and your body won't work. You won't be able to walk around anymore. If you sacrifice certain things, you may become fit and lean and mobile. This applies to almost everything in life, from sex to thinking. And unfortunately, we're in a society where there are agencies who are working to get us addicted to comfort and lies. Who they are, how they're doing it, That's a very, very complicated question, but it's quite obvious that's the process that's going on. And so one of the reasons, if I may just say so at the end, that I'm a Catholic Christian is because, first of all, I think Christianity is the best idea. I also think it's true. And having been a different kind of Christian for most of my life, now that the pressure is really on ideologically in the West, as far as I can see, not only I've discovered Catholicism, the things it says about it is true, but it's the only show in town. It's the only ideological, philosophical body of people with courage, track record, and clarity to take on board these two huge other collective ideas. And essentially, people are going to have to choose between being Muslims, Marxists, or Catholics. It's up to them what they choose. In one sense, I don't mind. I don't require people to believe what I do to make me comfortable. But I do realize that if you choose Marxism or Islam, you're going to live in a very, very different kind of collective society than the one you've inherited that the Catholic Christians built.
Now, there's so much, Gavin, that we could talk about. I want to, before we go to the break, we'll have to go shortly, and it doesn't require a long response, I suppose, but when the Catholic Pope introduces a subject called Chrislam, a merging of religions or the ideals, what is he talking about in relation to what you understand?
Well, the problem is no organization is free from corruption, and and there are always takeovers in organization. So the Catholic Church is in the middle of a civil war, just like everybody else, and it's really embarrassing because we've been quite good at ideological clarity, I suppose. But what's happened is that our CEO was a South American idealist who grew up in the 60s and 70s. And most of us have had to change our minds as we've grown up, and he just hasn't changed his. So he'll go away soon. Time will deal with him. And hopefully when you make the joke, is the Pope a Catholic, you'll finally be able to answer yes.
What a perfect response. We're going to take a break. Don't go anywhere. There's so much more to talk about with Gavin Ashenden. Don't go anywhere. This is Weekends here on TNT.
As a combat wounded veteran, I know how hard it is to come home and build a meaningful life. When I was in Iraq, our vehicle was hit. A rocket-propelled grenade exploded right under my seat. Traumatic brain injury, a fractured pelvis, severe burns. They didn't think I was going to make it. I had to learn to walk again and live with the scars, both visible and invisible.
DAV helps veterans like LaToya get the benefits they've earned. They help more than 1 million veterans every year in life-changing ways.
With DAV on my side, I was able to pursue my dreams. If my story can touch a heart, it can change a life. My victory is overcoming my wounds so I can help other veterans.
LaToya Lucas, may your victories inspire many more. Support more victories for veterans. Go to DAV.org.
My character, Shazam, knows all about growing up in a family full of teenage superheroes. They're bold.
Where's everyone going?
To fight crime?
Okay.
Adventurous. Shazam! There's never a dull moment. And no matter what happens, they'll always have your back. All they need is a place to grow and be themselves. And the best part is, you don't have to be a superhero to adopt a teen. Learn more about adopting a teen from foster care. Visit adoptuskids.org. You can't imagine the reward.
Discussing local, national, and international issues. Weekends with Jason Olbourne on today's News Talk, TNT.
Welcome back to Weekends. Now, if you have just joined us or you've just discovered us, I am interviewing Dr. Gavin Ashenden here on the show this Saturday here out of the east coast of Australia. It's a reminder that if you have just tuned in, you've probably missed 40 minutes of an incredible interview, and it's just an idea that for the future, if you do miss your interviews, please go on to the website, tntradio.live. You simply go to episodes, look up the presenter or your favourite presenter, and you can scroll through on both video and audio any of the interviews that you missed out on. This is one of those you do not want to miss. Gavin, I wanted to talk to you now about, again, more of this confusion that you've been expert in being able to provide perspective and nuance and detail. I had occasion to go shopping the other day to pick up some half-year sale bargains, and I met a young salesman who happens to be studying at university in the medical field. And we were just talking about life in general, and he explained to me that one day he'd like to move from regional Australia back to the capital city of Sydney, and we talked about the cost of living and the price of property, etc. And he was immediately talking about homes that are worth millions of dollars. And despite the fact that, wages go up, etc., the concept of being able to afford a property is almost something that at this stage a young person can't even fathom. And it says to me that perhaps that the property market that we've lived with, certainly over the last 20 or 30 years, is nothing more than an elaborate Ponzi scheme to marginalise young people, to make them believe that they can never afford what the older people have done, and therefore creates this great divide in society. So individuals, in actual fact, families, if you will, generations, will be fighting against each other. And of course, by design, looking to the government for the solution. Are we living in a great big false economy? Do you think this, again, complicated questions, and it's opinion-based. Do you think this is leading us to where we are politically as well? Is it more fuel to the fire? Just how do you read it yourself when you look at our kids today and wonder, are they going to be able to lead a better life, or can we leave them a better life? Is that even possible?
Well, I better start with a disclaimer. I don't understand economics, and I don't mean that I haven't tried to understand it. I just mean that economics are really quite complex, and mind you, I also don't think that many of the electorate understand economics either. So when the politicians say vote for me and this or that will happen, then it may not be the case. So I think the two of the ideas we've talked about are obviously in play here. One is the idea of the state versus the individual, or the state versus the family. So within the communist or Marxist ideology, the state works extremely hard to supplant the family, both above all in terms of education, and in terms of savings. They don't like you having savings or resources. The way in which, for example, the American state has made the African American completely dependent through single-parent families needing welfare is an example of that. It's hard to know quite, because I don't understand it economically, how the property boom has what directed it, but we do know what the consequence is. The consequence is that young people are not invested in society in the sense of they're not invested in their own society. They are indeed, as you say, thrown back on the state. And there's this terrible division between the rich and the poor. Again, Jordan Peterson's been very good with the Pareto principle and suggesting that, there's always a kind of 80-20 split. 20% of the people earn 80% of the population and of the goods. And it's one of these very strange constants throughout society at all times. But one of the crises that we're facing is that there's a very small group of very rich people, and they're getting very much richer faster. And the rest of us are getting very much poorer faster. And it's now got to our houses. And so, but the consequence is that it disenfranchises people. This whole business of individual responsibility, taking responsibility for your own life because you can, begins to be diminished if you can't build, own, buy, fix a house. And one of the big differences is, was certainly true in London, and a great argument against state housing. The state needed to provide housing for people, but at the same time, people who lived in it didn't take care of it. Whereas if you bought your house, then the people who bought their houses were invested in it, and they took care of their house, and they picked up other people's dog shit and other people's litter. There was a kind of a virtuous circle instead of a vicious circle. So the collectivist model, where you don't own it, the state owns it, where you're disempowered and therefore there's no point in you even trying, is the cycle that we're on, and it's touching property, and it's really very dangerous. And I've no idea how it will end, except that, in the economic history of the last 300 years, going back to the South Sea bubble maybe, economies overheat, they blow up, they collapse, people are damaged, and they start again. That may not happen this time because of the way in which the sort of one world thing that technology has brought in means that, if you like, local regional reboots can't happen because they're taking away cash from us. Everything depends upon a highly controlled technology in which the way you and I spend money now has been captured by somebody else. I've just begun deleting my Facebook entries that go back to the beginning of when it started, because I'm afraid that I'm going to be debanked at some point. Someone in the bank is going to look at me because I say something on TNT or somewhere else, and they'll look and they say, "Hey, this guy has always been a pain in the ass, and let's take his bank account away from him." And that's what they've been doing. Farage has been debanked, for example. I mean, that's one of the big crises. And then he just then a whole load of people, Christian charities are debanked, Christian legal organizations fighting for freedom of conscience are debanked. So I'm trying to make it slightly more difficult for them to discover what an ideological crook I am. They will discover it. I will be debanked. I probably end my life in prison, I'm sorry to say, if the trajectory continues as it does. But, that's one of the things that will tell us whether it's going to or not, are the state of the British elections in a couple of weeks' time.
Yeah, nothing could be more important to watch and follow on, and of course the results that come from that, and all of us are watching on, hoping that the Farage influence is going to create some change, at least in the trajectory. You feel like 5 more years of the Uni Party, but headed by the left from Keir Starmer. We just don't know where the UK is going to be come 2030. It's horrific. Now, I'd like to pivot for the moment and head towards the Royals. I just want to make this quick observation. At the beginning of today's our interview, I mentioned that in 1997 I took this world trip and went to the UK and was in London and just absolutely fell in love with the country and the city. I also went to New York City, and on a particular occasion, my best friend at the time took me along to a brand new bar. You had to book and get in, and we got in very late at night, and we sat down at this particular table. Within 3 minutes of sitting down, next to us at the other table, to sit down, was Jerry Seinfeld.
Wow.
At the height of his fame in 1997. So you can imagine there would have been, a couple of hundred people all seated at tables, Jerry Seinfeld sitting right next to us. And he was there. We were there for a couple of hours. And at that time, there was a procession of beautiful looking women, one after the other, walking over and leaning over and chatting, spending about 5 minutes and moving away. It was literally 15 of them, one after the other. And I said to my friend, who was a lawyer, he was working in a New York firm, I said, how does this work with this invasion of privacy, the United States? And he looked at me and he said simply, if you're earning $40 million a year doing a sitcom on television, this is what we call the price of fame. It comes with the expectation. From there, I'd like to compare that, therefore, given that you were the chaplain to the Queen, you know about the royal family, the cost and price of fame as it pertains to the royals, in particular to Princess Kate. We're told that she's been unwell, that she's receiving chemotherapy for an undisclosed cancer. She vanishes for 6 months and the speculation is rife. We see photographs that don't look like her from some shopping expedition, and a video that many claim was AI, a second photograph that the AI thing says that's an AI. And then she finally apparently appears in a carriage. What's going on, do you think, with the royal family, the House of Windsor? And in particular, is there anything we can determine about Princess Kate and what's going on within that family?
Wow, you do ask difficult questions, and inviting a succinct answer is difficult. Well, the most succinct, we can expand these if there's time and if you want to. The Seinfeld example is extremely good. The poor royal family, they surrender their individual rights to the collective again, but in a virtuous act. So, the Queen. People would often ask me, what were the Queen's opinions on such and such? And the answer was, she doesn't have any opinions. The whole point about a queen is she's not allowed opinions. Now, Elizabeth Windsor, if you like, the best example is, I think, analogy is Russian dolls. One doll inside a doll, inside a doll, inside a doll. And right at the bottom is Elizabeth Windsor behind a whole load of constitutional historical dolls. There's a real living human being in there. She's got feelings. She's got views. She's got opinions. but she doesn't let them out because the role of the monarchy requires that she shouldn't. One of the reasons I had to resign was that people thought that I might be speaking on her behalf, and the real anxiety was that I was, and so they had to silence me because I was disrupting the monarchy, and that was quite right. You can't have somebody speaking out within the monarchy. I mean, it's partly why Charles has made himself a hostage to fortune with the way he spoke out beforehand. But leaving that to one side, anyone entering the royal family has to sacrifice their own self-interest. And the dear, amazing Diana wouldn't do it, and it all blew up. Tragically, in that case, Kate has done it incredibly well. William is learning to do it, but he's finding it very difficult. Charles is learning to do it, and he's still finding it difficult. But at the same time, Kate has got badly ill, and it's no great surprise if people think about it. If you have somebody in their 40s that gets a bad cancer and requires radical treatment, they are going to disappear for 6 months, 9 months. I've got a friend, an Anglican bishop, who's got leukemia. He's been locked in a room for 9 months whilst he looked for a stem transplant. So I mean, that's what happens medically. But we're all just a little bit paranoid and overexcitable and willing to believe lies if people present them to us. And so inevitably, I think, if you don't wheel Kate out and say, look, here she is, you're allowed to touch her, which shouldn't happen in any civilized society, you've just got to deal with the fact someone in the royal family is ill and they're taking time to get better. That's one answer. There's another issue, which is much more problematic, and that is, can the royal family survive without the ideas that made monarchy what it is? And if you'll forgive me going back to it, the monarchy is a Catholic Christian idea. It's already set itself at a distance from its original conception by becoming increasingly Protestant. Well, the Protestants in this country borrowed all the Catholic clothes and buildings, and so they can keep the show going for a while. But to the extent that the royal family aren't even Christian, to that extent you hollow it out, and there'll come a point when it collapses. When will that happen? Probably sometime during William's life, I would think. I don't say that to be fatalistic. It's just that you've got to decide what the monarchy is and what the ideas are, and essentially, as we saw at the coronation, from the symbolism, they're profoundly Christian. You can't have a Christian idea and then practice it with values that are wholly unchristian. And the more woke the monarchy goes, the more it detaches itself from its umbilical cord and from its own raison d'etre.
An incredible answer yet again, and it's the detail and understanding of how this works. And many people have been considering if there could well be a collapse of the House of Windsor, and there it is, from an actual, real, living insider, based on philosophy of belief and religion and not practicing. And the fact that wokeism becomes the great irony, it's the cancer that could bring down the House of Windsor and not the actual physical diseases that Kate and Charles are going through at the moment. People look to the monarchy for all sorts of different reasons. Here in Australia, it's been the ultimate justification to not become a republic, that a constitutional monarchy is our best system. And yet when you argue within the conservative movements that support it here in Australia, there are others that saying no, that the system, that the House is broken, and they go, but it's our best model. So it's almost like the solution is to accept the worst of two or the best of two broken options, but not looking forward to something brand new and fresh. I guess with the last couple of minutes, therefore, if you were to extrapolate from your statement before that the House of Windsor may well collapse in William's lifetime, are you provided with some form of hope that there can be a happy new emergence of something, or is this going to continue down a pathway that's worse than we see today?
Can I just say very briefly that the reason the monarchy is such a valuable thing is that, as you quite rightly say, it stops a president getting his hands on society, and most presidents abuse their powers. So it creates a buffer zone to avoid us being exploited politically and in other ways. And looking back at the Queen, one of the great things monarchy does is to embody self-sacrifice. One of the reasons people loved the Queen was because they saw that she put herself second to the people, to the idea, to the nation, to the family. It was a wonderful example of self-sacrifice. And if you go back to the fact that we're all having to choose between self-sacrifice and self-indulgence, that to have someone who's doing that rather than grafting at the top, as all presidents do, it's a very healthy and good thing. We lose it at our peril ideologically. Is the House of Windsor going to survive? Well, the fact is we're on the verge of a civilizational collapse for all the reasons we've talked about. And once when one thing goes, the whole lot's going to go. I suspect. I've just turned 70. I have no idea whether I'll live one more year or another 20 years. But what I do know is that all the things that matter to me, and they've grown more real as I've grown older, have got to do with the idea of an intelligent creator who's given me my life and responsibilities, who loves me, forgives me, offers me hope, and tells me I'm on a journey. Everything I do makes sense in that philosophy, and I'm deeply committed to it. And one of the reasons why I'm a bit mouthy about it is because I've seen what good it does in terms of allowing people to flourish. So I want to help. I've no idea whether everything's going to collapse or not, but the only thing that will stop it, effectively, is Jesus and the church, self-sacrifice, love, forgiveness, justice, and all the values that we care about. And it's in our own hands to some extent, the extent to which we're willing to be lied to and become comfortable, or stand up for principles that really matter and save ourselves and our children.
Dr. Gavin Ashenden, in the words of President Trump, perfect interview. Thank you very much. It was wonderful to meet you and discuss. We have to take a break. We'll be back here on TNT.